What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the PTCOFFEECAST, brought to you by The Movement. My name is Dalton, and alongside me today is my beautifully bearded friend, William. William, how are we doing today?
I'm doing good, extra comfortable. This is our first time ever recording on our couch.
I know. I have a couple thoughts on it
Oh, yeah?
right off the bat.
Let's hear them.
One, my neck is really sore right now. So
I shouldn't laugh at that.
thinking of having to rotate my head the whole time like this
Oh, man.
to talk to you
Do I need to,
is one.
lean forward like this?
No.
Okay.
Is one something I'm worried about. The other thing is it's a much better vibe though. I'm more, this is more us, the lounged couch with the wooden coffee table with a nice cup of coffee with the ambiance of the World Atlas of Coffee book. This is more at home. So
Ambiance is just off the charts right now. We got plants. We got plants behind us.
yeah, I'm probably gonna keep my arm right here, very close
I like it.
to you.
Yeah.
So
I'm glad.
as long as you feel comfortable with that.
I'm super comfortable.
Speaking of comfortable and being uncomfortable, that's what we're going to talk a little bit about today. See that segue?
Nice job, man.
Bro, that's a couple years of podcasting right there.
That was... Whew.
But before we get into that, guys, if you aren't subscribed to the podcast, make sure you subscribe on all podcast platforms. If you aren't subscribed to the YouTube channel, make sure you go and subscribe to the YouTube channel. We are putting out the video version of this podcast along with some other content, so you guys can check us out there, as well as our mentorship, which is now officially open to everyone to apply. We had people on the wait list who are now in the process of joining, and we're going to fully open the applications up to everyone else who hasn't been on the wait list yet. So if you want to sign up for that, make sure you check out the link in our bio on Instagram or in the show notes below. We're super stoked to get that first cohort underway shortly. So make sure you guys sign up. And then I think that about covers everything.
Nice. Good job.
Yeah.
All right.
So
Let's do it.
yeah, so today, as we were brainstorming what we should talk about, you had kind of mentioned a couple common things that have been coming up with some of the mentees that we've already been mentoring, which kind of led us to talking a little bit about our own experiences. And, I think it's a common thing to talk about, being comfortable with the uncomfortable or leaning into some of the uncomfortable things in life. And I think when it comes to physio, there's a lot of that goes on that I think, we could embrace and lean into and kind of try to grow into as clinicians. So I think that's kind of more of what we're going to highlight today.
Yeah, totally. Some conversations we've been having around the clinic lately and with a lot of our mentees about this sort of thing.
So why don't you kick it off with kind of, the first little conversation piece we were having around maybe being someone who's a little bit more introverted or maybe has a little bit of social anxiousness. It's definitely something that I've discovered over the last couple of years that I realized that I do have some of that. So I'd be curious to dive into that topic because I think we can relate on some of this stuff.
Yeah, because I think just sometimes I get I am a bit of a perfectionist with things, and I get anxious about maybe having a particular conversation or what the response is going to be, and I overthink it and I get worried, and sometimes that would limit me from maybe doing it or having that conversation. Specifically with us, one of the things that we don't do it ourselves as much anymore, but we used to before we brought on Jenna. But we used to call our clients before initial assessments, and this is something that we try to recommend to people to do and try to help them with doing that. And I used to get pretty anxious about going through those conversations and making those calls.
Yeah, which I don't think is that uncommon of a situation. I think I felt a little bit of that early on and then kind of moved by that pretty quickly. But I'm curious to hear maybe a little bit why that was something that was uncomfortable or drove some anxiety for you?
You know, I think it's like just simple things like, oh, am I going to intrude on their day? Like, am I calling and then they're at work and like it's going to be awkward? You know, things like that. Just little things where like I would go through those scenarios like, oh, what if they don't resonate with my approach, right? Or like resonate, what if they aren't giving me much information? What if they're short on the phone? Like little things like that I would just kind of go through my head before I made a call, and that would make me anxious.
And then I guess like what was the outcome that you started to realize when you obviously like leaned into doing that, because that's just what we do here, so it's almost like you just had to do it anyway. What, like, how did that actually go? And I guess there's probably some reasons as to why, you know, there's reasons why we have those phone calls made. And I think that's probably one of the learning experiences of leaning into some of that anxiousness is the outcome of actually making those phone calls. But what actually started to happen once you did that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think you're right in that, like, it was sort of forced upon me. I think sometimes that's good, like to force yourself, like just make it non-negotiable because you're going to learn something from it. And what happened to me was I kind of realized it's something I needed to do to overcome that anxiety. And avoiding it would just make it worse. But when I started calling them, like sometimes those exact things would happen.
Yeah.
It just wasn't that bad.
Right.
Right. It's like you make it up in your head that it's going to be this like horrible thing, but it's like, oh, I'm just, I don't have much time to talk right now. I'm heading to work. But I'm looking forward to seeing you. Done.
Yeah.
No problem. Sounds great. We'll see you on Monday.
Yeah.
Right. And what I started seeing was like, even in those situations, because I had made the effort to reach out, it just already started building a bit of a relationship, even if there was no conversation. But it's just like, hey, I'm glad you reached out. Sorry I couldn't talk. You know, it's like they're seeing that I at least care about their case, you know, and I wanted to talk to them. So even in like the worst scenarios, it wasn't that bad. So that was something I noticed. And then on the complete flip side of that, I started realizing like sometimes it really changed the game, you know, where I would get into like, if I had the time, I would get into like a deep conversation with somebody on the phone and like build a lot of trust with them before they come in. And just, I started having the opposite where I'm like less anxious and more excited about the session because I know what they're experiencing. It gives me a little more time to like think about what I'm gonna try to look at that day. And they really appreciate the call and checking in. And so it was like, oh, this is actually making the session way better, building a lot more trust and helping to like strengthen the relationship.
Yeah. And it's funny, like there's two things, like obviously you think the biggest fear that you had around it comes true and then ends up not being as big as you thought, which I think is very like normal with a lot of like some of these like fears that we create in our own head around situations. And I think the act of actually doing and experiencing that fear and realizing that it's not that bad is a good way to overcome those things, right? It's like gradual exposure to what you're uncomfortable with.
100%. And like this is just a microcosm of like so many other examples of like types of situations you might run into in our job. And like it's such a important skill to hone. It's just like having those kind of uncomfortable questions, because it could be like, you know, for another example would be something like I'm just gonna stop when my insurance runs out. Like that's something that we all run into, right? So like that's a conversation where there's no way to have that conversation without it being against some resistance, right?
Totally. Yeah.
And so like, but that could theoretically help you really take that person to where they need to be or not.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, there's a clear example right there where like just getting better at tackling those types of scenarios head on versus avoiding them can really change the way that you achieve outcomes.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and I mean, there's plenty of examples where that comes true, and I think a lot of the similar fears around like what you had with the phone comes in those situations as well. It's like in the fear of, I'm just gonna stop when my insurance runs out situation. It's like now you're broaching into a conversation around financials and like committing to something, which is always like a challenging conversation or an uncomfortable conversation, for anyone to have. But knowing that like if you lean into that and you can navigate that appropriately and have some ways in which you can navigate that question, which is something that we talk about in the mentorship, just so everyone's aware. Slight plug, but the reasoning why we do that is because these situations come up often, and instead of having like a panic response, which you still have most of the time regardless on how well you are at handling those situations, you now have some skills in which you can approach that conversation. So you can fall back on some of the things that can help you navigate those conversations, which can be taught, that makes that situation a lot easier for you to overcome, like, and manage for yourself and for the client, which is going to lead to, better outcomes in that situation, which is similar to you leaning into making the phone call, which ends up resulting in most of the time better rapport and better connection with the client, which then makes the experience better, which then makes the potential of them sticking around a lot higher, which then obviously improves the likelihood of them accomplishing their goals.
Yeah, the importance of like practicing, I think you were mentioning there, is like so important, just practicing and viewing it as a skill, and it applies to so many different scenarios. Even like to get like a good outcome for yourself, you have to be okay with like being uncomfortable. Like something that we've talked about before is just like asking for a Google review, can be a little awkward.
Yeah.
Because you're like, what if they don't want to, or like, what if their experience wasn't what I think it was, and that sort of thing, right? And so like, but the negative of like not doing that is that you're likely not going to get very many Google reviews, which are a great like, boost for you, yeah. And also great for people to see that you do a good job working with people. So like getting comfortable, like just with the uncertainty of like what they might say, and just being okay with like having more conversation around that is like something so beneficial to like your enjoyment of your career.
Yeah.
Or fulfillment,
Yeah, I think it takes a little bit of vulnerability to like put yourself in that position. And even though like, again, and this is something that I struggle with a lot, is like the at first with like the Google review aspect of things, right? Like there's just something sometimes that's a little bit awkward about asking someone else to write something about you, right? But the funny part about that was like, it's like such it was such a me issue. Like it was such a me problem in terms of me feeling uncomfortable with doing that I didn't even realize that it's actually such a great opportunity for the actual client to get so much fulfillment out of writing something for you because they had such a good experience. Like you're actually taking away their opportunity to share their experience, which is actually most of the time what we've found is like super meaningful for that client to actually share their experience with you. But because I was so concerned about that, because it was like an insecurity for me, I wouldn't even ask that person, to give them the opportunity to do that,
100%. And like this, it just extends into so many different areas. Like as you're talking, I'm like thinking about some other conversations I've had with mentees, and like about even something like delivering a plan of care, and I think some people just don't do it because the person could be like, this doesn't make sense, or it's sort of putting your organizational skills like to test, and like there's a little bit of vulnerability that even comes with that.
Mm-hmm.
But like if you actually do it, you realize that you can be more collaborative with your client, right? And it actually strengthens the level of excitement for the plan to come, and like this is just another example. There's like all across the kind of client life cycle, there's all these circumstances where like you have to be a bit vulnerable. You have to be okay with having like a bit of an uncomfortable conversation. And like I think there's something to that, and like how much that skill impacts your ability to have meaningful outcomes with clients.
Yeah. And I feel like that is what can drive meaningful like experiences for you as a clinician. And a lot of times, we hear about burnout and whatnot. And there's many factors that go into that. I don't think it's just one, but I know for myself, like in past scenarios, it's like I wasn't feeling as much meaning with my sessions and as much fulfillment with my sessions. And part of that could be the fact that I wasn't even opening myself up to being able to experience that, because I wasn't actually leaning into that uncomfortableness of getting to that level. And I think sometimes we're forced based off of just like busyness and time in certain clinical scenarios where you can't do that. But there's many times where it's just like the uncomfortableness of asking that question that like you feel like would be a good question to ask to hear their experience, or just having a vulnerable conversation with your client about how things have gone and how it's gone for you as a clinician. I think limits your ability to get those super meaningful experiences that we're all craving and looking for. Like how many times do you hear clinicians talk about, well, I got into this profession to like help people. And yeah, we're helping people, but we're not even taking the time to actually like bathe in the glory of like being able to commit to something with another person that's really hard, that they're having a hard struggle with. It's hard for you as a clinician to deliver on that care. To be able to actually experience that full moment is like something that we don't do often enough, I don't think.
And as you're talking there, I'm like, I think there's this like fallacy of like the way to conquer burnout is to do less work.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't think that's really the way.
Right.
What you want is more fulfillment.
Yeah.
That's what you actually want. And so it's like, well, you need to do work to figure out how to get that. That's going to help your burnout, is when you go to work and you're like pumped about what you did.
Totally. Yeah, I think that I agree. I think most of the times, a higher percentage of the time, that's the case. And there's, again, circumstances are different for other people, but I mean, it's the reason we've preached the model of care that we've preached, and like, the way that we've gone through the mentorship with like talking about how to overcome imposter syndrome or manage imposter syndrome, how to, create an unforgettable experience for your client, like also creating an unforgettable experience for yourself, how to like create a plan that's simple and able to deliver, talking about sales, talking about marketing, like all of those things are shifting kind of the total clinical experience, which we're hoping is going to provide people with the opportunity to have more meaning with their career, right? And that can be done even within your own clinic that you're in that may not be the best environment for that. The things that we talk about in that mentorship and even just on that podcast are things that you can take control of even within those scenarios on some scale to bring more meaning and fulfillment and control, to your career, which is the important pieces of like longevity within this profession.
It's going to require work. It's going to require discomfort, right? Maybe being a bit vulnerable. But on the other side of that is some potentially really high outcomes.
Totally. And like as we go through the conversation, I just think that's really what has pushed us to like create the environment that we've created and like go to the model of care that we've gone to and have an hour-long session and like not have our team be like seeing a ton of people and like creating those moments just for us with our team and our ability to interact with them and like give them the ability to do all the things we just talked about with like what we're including in the mentorship so that they can get like fulfillment out of that. Like it's even bigger than just like helping empower clients to take control of their health. It's like we want to try to shift even the experience for the clinician, because there's so many good clinicians out there that can crush it, but they end up stepping away because they're getting to the point where it's not worth it anymore because they're not having fulfillment. They're overworked, but they haven't even, I think sometimes haven't been given the opportunity to express the things that they want to express. I know that was why I wanted to create my own thing.
100%.
All right, we should wrap up because I'll just rant forever. We're in this new spot. I'm on the couch. I'm drinking coffee. We're talking about vulnerability. I feel like we're like Emma Jack today.
Hey, shout out
Emma. But yeah, we'll wrap it up there, guys. Thanks for tuning in. If you aren't subscribed to the podcast, make sure you subscribe at PTCOFFEECAST on Instagram. If you aren't listening, I'm botching this exit. You know how many exits I've done on this podcast, and I'm botching it?
It's bound to happen at some point.
Oh man, I'm just too hype.
Because I'm looking at you way too intensely.
It's partially that. But if you guys aren't following us on YouTube, make sure you do that. We'll put out all the video episodes there. If you want to join the mentorship, we talked about it quite a bit in this episode. Applications are now open, so you can apply. We'll be launching our first cohort here shortly, which we're super stoked about. And then I think that's it. I think we just got to get out of this episode. So thanks for tuning in, guys. As always, stay caffeinated. Peace.